Hi, Anti-Society! Welcome back to the Anti-Social Planet. Today we're getting into some more Vinland Saga Season 2, and things are really heating up. We're like past the halfway mark of the season, so there's definitely a lot of stuff going on. We focused a lot on Arnheid. I'm really not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right, because we learned in the last episode that she is Swedish, and I am not, so I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of her name, but learning a lot about her and her backstory, and specifically in relation to her husband, who has also been enslaved and has recently escaped but also been recaptured now by Snake and his group. Up in the air about what's going to happen with him, because she did go to see where he was tied up. She didn't really want anything to do with him. She was talking about waiting out the storm and not getting involved, but at the end of the last episode we saw her leaving to go and see him, so I don't know what is going to develop from that, but there seems to be a lot of baggage with her, which I knew would happen. No one gets enslaved because they have a good backstory, so lots of layers to her, and I really like that we were getting into some of the dynamics of gender and how that influences how she interacts with the world and how the world views her, because she talked about not having any say in the decisions that were being made in her little village that she lived in, and how everything was fine, and she didn't understand why they had to, go after these natural resources and get involved in these other affairs. Why couldn't they just be happy with what they had? Very interesting to learn some more about her. Feels a bit like the quiet before the storm, because there is other conflicts kind of brewing in the peripheral, and we've left that for a little bit to go back to farm life, but the complications of that. So just lots of layers being built up of all the different conflicts and things that are going on, but we'll see what we end up doing in this episode. So let's just get into it. In 3, 2, 1, go. Starting with the opener. That can go either way. That either means that we're doing with a lot of stuff, or that it's all right. I really don't know at this point. I know that there's so much that's about to happen that I'm like constantly on edge, because I'm like, at some point Leif is gonna show up, right, with Ketil and his sons, which is already gonna be a bit of a bad omen. Right? But I'm also waiting for like Knut. Like there's no way that I don't know, I'm just like I'm bracing for impact like the whole time. I mean, even just Ketil coming back, I feel like it's going to be an issue. I mean, we also learned in the last episode that Arnheid is pregnant with Ketil's child, which is a whole other layer of complication, right? Which is part of the reason that she's kind of going back and forth about whether or not she wants to be involved in the kind of one-man army that her husband has become. Because she's not just considering like her own life, but she's also like that of her unborn child. She's already lost a child. Are we okay? I was like, are we looking at her, or are we just kind of listless? He's definitely gone a bit manic, her husband. So storm, that's ominous. We were talking so much about like symbolically a storm and like waiting it out, not getting involved. Ooh. Oh. Meddling with their operations. They gonna deny her or let her see him? Like, probably a bad idea. He seems to be a bit manic in regards to her, but I do kind of believe that. I really don't know what to do with Snake because on the one hand, I'm like sometimes he seems all right, and then other times I'm like, I'm like she's probably just gonna ask and he's gonna cave. Sir, yes, you have a job that you've been given. He's gonna cave though. He is the weakest link. And I wonder if that's intentional, right? Like, is Snake a bad person? It's just like, no, you can't see your husband, but is he also like an all right person? And that he's like, let me leave you with someone that I know will probably cave if asked by a pretty face. Like, if he really wanted to make sure that she didn't see him and went back to where she was supposed to be, like on the farm, would he not have done it himself? Like, he was heading back towards, like, to see Kitsil's wife anyway. Why wouldn't he just take her with him? She's still kind of scared of him, which is sad. I get it, but it's heartbreaking. He does seem to kind of calm down around her, honestly. Like, it's when he's like threatened and it's linked to like the trauma, obviously, of his time being a slave. But when he's with her, he seems to like calm down and come back to more of who he was before everything, right? When they were just like living as a family together. I don't know why we're being crude. We can't see his eyes, and that makes me feel uncomfortable. He is about to do something that he doesn't want her to see. Even just having like his one eye swollen shut, I understand that that's like because of how he's been beaten, but also there's literally like only half of him is visible, right? Like he's two-facedness just in like that asymmetry of his face, right? Like she doesn't really know what she's going to be getting with him. The man that she married or the man that he's become. But it won't be because their son's gone. And he just doesn't get that, right? Like he's like, we can go back. And she knows that they can't. There is no going back to before. Oof. The rain with the focus on the fire, too. Oof. Yeah, you can't leave them alone. Is it enough? I don't know. I feel like she's got more fight in her than you give her credit for. She's made it this far. I don't know if that's your only flaw. You do work on a farm with slaves. I don't trust her husband, though, that he's like properly tied up. Like, you're getting real close. Yep. Yep. Ooh, jeez. See, like, he's calm when it's just the two of them, but the moment that he has to interact with anyone else. Ooh, Jesus. Yeah. I feel like an artery got severed there. I was expecting him to like get untied, but apparently he doesn't need like limbs. Yeah. Like I said, there's this two-facedness to him. I mean, she hasn't even like touched him. Like she's scared of him. And are they gonna think that she had something to do with it because they don't have anyone else there who saw what happened? And are they gonna believe that he did it all on his own, tied up, right? Oh, and she's stuck in the storm now, right? We talked before about like waiting out the storm and like letting it pass. And she's like physically in a storm now, but she's also in the storm in that she like walked into it, being near him and being around him. Did we cut the ropes? Ooh, there's a severed hand. Did she cut the ropes? Did he cut the ropes? We don't know. It's so interesting that we see so much of his like the results of um Gardar, his like the results of his brutality, but we don't see much of it other than that one moment biting that guy's neck. Jesus. Oof. I mean, Snake was mad when you only killed one of his men. Now he's, I mean, he left you alive. Yeah, I was like, he left you alive the first time. But now he's out for blood. And then we see like Aenon waiting out the storm, right? Like he was asked. I mean, it's kind of interesting that it stops like on a shot of him because he wanted her to like be free, to be off of the farm. And if she is now, then that is kind of like waiting out the storm, not getting involved. Probably. Well, she's found trouble, but at least it's not on you. That seems to be the theme. All we were doing was living quietly. Yeah. I don't know. I think you might understand it better than most people. That's the second I was wrong we've gotten in this episode, which is also interesting. Like two men who were living a quiet life and got involved in conflict, not understanding the consequences of doing that. He has changed a lot. It does sound fantastical. True. That's what I'm saying. He's like, I have no right to say anything about like violence and war, but I think he's the only one that does. Ooh, there's conviction there. Yep. Ooh, wow, that line. Like the line between warrior and slave driver is blurry. Dang, it's true though. We're dealing with a warrior culture here. So you're gonna have to like deconstruct that. True. If it's normalized, it's difficult for you to even see that there's a problem. Mm-hmm. See, cowards can't survive. We've had that with Catil. He's also talked about like he's basically made this like myth about him being more violent than he actually is because he knows that he's like too cowardly to survive. Ugh. Yep. Wow. The like burden of that, like the imagery. The sun like rising like on his face though. It's true. That's just a starting point, right? Aw. Why is he getting me emotional? But he knows something about protecting, right? Yeah, it's like this weird balance of like how do you gain peace without fighting? And I think that's where we kind of get like Knut's problem is that like he kind of justifies his violence and brutality under the guise of like I'm making their lives better. Vinland, one might say. One might call it Vinland, maybe. Name drop. We haven't talked about it since like what, episode one, episode two? By name? Was that the girl from before? Like the one village? The girl who like survived, everyone else was like killed in her village, but she lived. She like stole the ring. Well, probably not untouched, but we can talk about that particular part of history another time. If only life was here and could help you find it. If only you could be reconnected. It would be, but it would be wonderful. Gosh, everything's gonna. I'm feeling the uplifting music and the brighter color gradient, and I'm just like, oh, everything's about to go just absolutely awful. Yeah, it is the first bit of good news we've heard in a bit, which just makes me more nervous. Are they gonna see if they're still here, if they helped? Because they know that they're friends with her. Yep. Ooh, I love that change in angle, the like shake to the camera too, like so different from the other angles that we've gotten through all that like hopeful, uplifting moments of like their interaction. And then the moment that things start to get shaky and unsteady, we get that difference in camera angle. Oof. Yeah. He is not happy. Oh boy, so many interesting things in that, and like we're just bonkers given that in terms of plot and like action happening there wasn't a whole lot. Like we had at the beginning with Gardar and his viciousness, and that was like as close as we got to any kind of like real action in this episode, but a lot of like quieter moments, more dialogue heavy, which can go either way with anime specifically because it is a visual medium, that having a really dialogue heavy episode can be a bit tricky to play off in a way that is entertaining. But there were so many good lines in it. I feel like that whole speech from Thorfinn, there were so many moments where I'm like, oh, that's a good one, that's a good line, that's a good line, that calls back to this. I feel like if I had more time to really pull it apart, and obviously I have very limited knowledge of Japanese, so I'm just going for translations. There may be more layers had I known the Japanese, but the fact that we had two people in this saying I was wrong, who were wrong in that they chose a warrior lifestyle, right? We had Gardar, who chose to fight and defend and take the natural resources that they had found. And then we had Thorfinn, who chose to fight and be a warrior to avenge his father. And those two people who have both chosen the path of violence and being a warrior and leaning into warrior culture, both saying within this episode, I was wrong, and trying to apologize for the things that they had done and the damage that they had done, I think is really interesting and potent. I can't even go through all of them, all of the good moments in Thorfinn's little speech there of him talking about how it isn't just war, it isn't just slavery, it's a whole systematic problem here. And I've talked about that before, about there's this cycle of people have violence done to them and they take that forward and they try to take revenge for that, right? So they're like, oh, this is how the world has treated me, this is how I'm going to treat other people, and I'm going to treat them that way, whether that is for revenge, whether that is to protect themselves. We said the line of cowards can't survive, they won't, right? And I think that Arnar didn't really comprehend that fully from his small village life. Thorfinn being, it's not just that it's a warrior culture, right? It's not just that we glorify people who are warriors, who fight, who have taken more lives. The more lives you've taken, the more prestige you have, the more power you have. But the opposite is also true. Being passive will get you killed. People will get rid of you, will kill you because of that. And not because you find yourself in the middle of a conflict, but because they see you as lesser, right? We had the whole breakdown with the one episode that was very Catil focused, where he talked about the fact that he knows he's a coward, and because of that he tries so hard to be seen as someone who is intimidating and violent. Like all these stories of him like in wars being a warrior, being a fighter, right? Him saying it's not true, it's blown out of proportion, but I let that happen. I let there be stories and tales about me because that gives me the reputation that I need in order to keep my power, to keep my authority, to not be seen as a coward and killed because of it, especially since he does have land, right? People will try to kill him for land, regardless of what his reputation is, right? That is already the danger that he has just being somebody who owns things, right? Who has some kind of wealth, that if he were seen as a coward, that would be an even greater threat on his life, right? If you have even the tiniest bit of anything in this world and you are seen as a coward, people are going to kill you to take it from you. That is such an important thing to bring into this. How are you someone who is passive and wants to not be engaged in the violence the way that we have Thorfinn talking about, whilst also not being seen as a coward? Like, how do you have power and authority? And I'm thinking it throughout this episode of at some point Thorfinn is going to have to step into a role of leadership in this, and he keeps saying, I don't deserve it, I can't say anything because I've done all of these awful things. Who am I to have an opinion, to have influence over this, because I've done so many of these things that I am now advocating against? But I think that's what makes him good for that position, right? And pointed out of, you're the only person who understands both sides of this, so I think that makes you much better at deciding what the solution is, or even like engaging with it. Like, you understand both what it means to be on the side of the Norse and being a warrior, being someone who is part of that culture, and someone who has been enslaved, been on the losing side of it, had your family and friends killed and attacked in order to like pillage what you've had. Like you're on both sides, and therefore you're probably more qualified than everyone else. But how do you do that? How do you bring peace without fighting for it? And I don't know how you do that. I don't know if I have the solutions for that, but so many things. I feel like I could talk about so many different things in this episode that were so good, which is amazing given that it was so dialogue heavy instead of plot action heavy. And I think that it's just setting up wonderful building blocks, especially between Thorfinn and Anna, them building their ideology and what is going to push them forward, and how they're going to be going to Vinland, creating this Vinland, walking into a position of like authority and power that is going to come up, I'm assuming, at some point. And I think there's so many fascinating things that were tied together in this episode that have been built up throughout the season and referenced in the first season that are going to be like pulled forward into who Thorfinn is now and how he is going to engage with the world. And it just makes me so excited for what's about to come, to have this character moment of a real summary of like how we've gotten to this point, even though I know it's probably all going to come crashing down in the most horrible way. But at the moment it feels a little bit uplifting, which is good. But I hope you enjoyed watching that along with me. You can click this place to go into my previous reactions, or you can subscribe to miss next time I post a Vinland Saga reaction. I will see you in the next video. Bye.